Welcome to Comfort Crime with Lindsay Sanchez, a cozy mystery podcast where no actual crimes have been committed. Today we'll continue Death at Dogwood Lake, a novella about Georgia Lennox, whose perfect first date turns into a perfect nightmare when she discovers a dead body. And instead of finding romance, she's pulled into a murder investigation where hometown secrets run deeper than the alpine lake where it all started. If this is your first time here, welcome! And please start with episode 1, chapter 1. There is a link to it in the show notes. For everyone else, we'll continue to chapters 12 and 13. But first, an update. Woohoo! It's here! This is the final episode of Death at Dogwood Lake, the novella we've been reading together for a few months. And because I'm feeling the holiday spirit, I've decided to give you an early Christmas present. This last episode is going to be 2 chapters. I'm smooshing them together and giving you one big episode, so there will be no cliffhanger to carry you through the holidays. After this, we can all take a well-deserved 2-week break and then meet right back here bright and early in January for our brand new mystery. But I need your help. I have so much of this new mystery planned out. The plot is brewing, the suspects are suspicious, and the clues are properly cryptic. But there's one critical thing I'm missing: the title. You already know so many of the characters from Death at Dogwood Lake, and you've gotten a feel for the setting. So who better to help me with the name of this next adventure than you? If you have any brilliant title ideas, please email me. Or, if you know me personally, and many of you do, please feel free to text. I would absolutely love to hear your suggestions. Mostly today, I want to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I hope they are both full of peace and love and everything holly and jolly. And thank you for being such wonderful readers and for coming on this cozy mystery journey with me. I'm so excited for our next adventure coming January 7th. I'll see you in the new year with a fresh mystery, a cup of something warm, and hopefully the perfect title. Until then, enjoy the finale, stay warm, and maybe solve a mystery or 2 of your own. Last time, Georgia raced against the clock in her sister's borrowed car without a driver's license and arrives at the Harding home just as fists began to fly between Jake and Eric Harding. But as she pulls the 2 apart, the pieces finally click into place. Owen Meadows, Jake's father, was protecting a son who wasn't his, and Georgia finds the mud that changes everything. In this small town where everyone knows everyone's business, the most dangerous secrets are the ones people keep to protect those they love. Death at Dogwood Lake, Chapter 12. Sitting on the Hardings' front lawn with Eric, waiting for Officer Lennox felt like an eternity. But once he showed up, everything went so quickly. Before Georgia could get more than 2 words in, Eric had told her dad everything, and they had both ended up in the back of his police car. Eric, because he had confessed to being the one to hit Tom into the lake, and Georgia, because she couldn't bear to leave him in the back by himself, like a criminal, which he technically was. So was she. In the last 24 hours, she'd done plenty of illegal things. She also wasn't ready to face her father, his anger or disappointment at disobeying him again. For the first few minutes, they sat in silence, Officer Lennox driving on the other side of the plastic partition, and her and Eric buckled in the back. "How'd you figure it out?" Eric broke the silence. Georgia blinked, surprised he'd spoken. It took her only a few moments to figure out what he was asking. How had she figured out that Eric was involved? That was easy enough, the hat. But how had she figured out that he and Owen were in on it together? "It rained last night," Georgia said. "At first, when I saw your house, when me and my mom came to bring the lasagna, I thought that's just where one of you had left it. Like you hadn't had time to put the hose away after watering the plants, but it rained." It rained. Eric nodded like he understood. Their town was so dry during the hot summer months that when it did rain, everyone in Dogwood gratefully accepted the help keeping their plants and yard alive. Last night had been the biggest rain in months. Everybody would happily be taking a break from their hose and hoping it would translate to a break in their water bill. That was also probably why the garden center had been so busy. The day after a rain was the perfect time to pull weeds and plant anew, especially heat-resistant, sun-loving flowers. "I was at the meadows," Georgia explained. "When Owen came home, his bike was clean and his shoes were wet. Everything was wet. I couldn't figure it out, but everything dries so fast here, I knew it had been recent." Eric nodded again. Georgia could barely make out his shape in the dark car, the sun so completely set now. "Well, that's how I knew you both were involved, but that doesn't explain what you were doing there at the lake." Georgia had put so many pieces of this puzzle together, but there was still something missing. Some of it made sense, like Owen protecting his best friend's son, and Eric and Tom fighting, Tom accidentally ending up in the lake. All of that fit. But remembering Jake's face when he realized that his dad had been in their special place with Eric, guessing that it hadn't been the first time and that there was a chance that's why he wasn't going with Jake anymore. That was the part that didn't add up. Being Lisa's best friend, Georgia knew Jake Meadows better than most random high school girls, and the one thing she knew for sure was how much he loved his family. So as much as he loved his friend and was trying to help his son, she knew he wouldn't trade one son for another. If they had just been up here bonding, they could have invited Jake. Or at the very least, they would have known of his plans of taking her there. No, that part didn't add up at all. "So what were you doing at the lake?" It wasn't Georgia's business. She knew that. But she also knew if she didn't find that one missing piece, it would keep her up at night. "It was a business meeting," Eric said finally, probably sensing that if he didn't tell her something, she wouldn't be able to leave it alone. At the lake? Georgia wasn't buying it. They all worked at the same place, with offices and desks and paper. There was no reason for them to hike up the mountain like some team-building activity and meet in secret. Unless they didn't all work at the same place. "You were meeting Pineville," Georgia whispered, finally stepping back enough to see the full view. "Quiet." Eric glanced at Officer Lennox through the plastic. "Don't say another word." Georgia stopped cold at the look on Eric's face, a mixture of anger and fear, mostly fear. So it had been a secret meeting at the lake, only not with the 3 men from Dogwood Nursery. It was just Eric, Owen, and Pineville Nursery. "You're the one that cut Tom out of the deal, not Owen," Georgia guessed, her brain working overtime to process all the new little pieces of the twisted day. Eric nodded, apparently just relieved that Georgia wasn't talking about Pineville Nursery. "Tom found out we were meeting in secret without him. He found out we cut him out of the deal he originally made. He stormed up the mountain ready for a fight," Eric admitted, then chuckled. He must have been able to see the look of alarm on Georgia's face because he cracked a wry smile to reassure her. "I can handle Tom." He shook his head. "Could handle Tom. But it was so muddy that day. And I was so mad. He's the one that introduced us to them, thought up the whole scheme of selling to them. And once they got it in their head they wanted us, there wasn't much we could do about it. But I'll rot in a cell before I let Tom have a cent of my father's business. I found a way to cut him out. It had to be just Owen and the Pineville Nursery. That was the only way to protect the money. And in a roundabout way, my mom. Owen didn't like it, but I signed over all my shares to him and convinced him to do the deal anyway." He trailed off, letting the rest of the story fade. "You know what happened when he got up there. One hit. He slipped in the mud, fell over a log, and face down in the lake. We knew right away there was nothing we could do. There was so much blood." He looked at Georgia like he was asking her for forgiveness. If he needed absolution, it wasn't from her, but she knew what he meant about knowing there was no way to help. She and Jake had taken one look at Tom lying there in the water and had known he was gone. Georgia nodded. "And the other guys?" Georgia asked quietly and vaguely enough that she hoped Eric would answer without freaking out that she'd brought them up. "They stayed long enough to threaten our families if we so much as hinted that they were there." "So you decided to keep quiet?" "It was Owen's idea to have him take the blame. He said he wouldn't go looking for it, but my hat had gotten knocked off in the fight, and then you and Jake showed up. I panicked." Georgia didn't know what else to say. None of the words coming to mind seemed to be enough. Eric had accidentally killed his stepdad in self-defense, but it was complicated. Before that, he'd cut him out of a business deal, and they both had 5 years of fighting between them. As they pulled into the police station and parked near the front doors, there were only 2 words she could say, though she knew they weren't enough. "I'm sorry." She put her hand on his shoulder. He closed his eyes and nodded, a single tear squeezing out, rolling down his cheek. "I'll be okay," he sniffed, and wiped his cheek on his shoulder, like brushing the tear aside made it disappear, like it never existed. "Just take care of my mom and Ryder." "We will." Officer Lennox got out of the car, opened Georgia's door and waited for her to get out, then went around the back and opened Eric's before leading him into the station. "Wait here," Georgia's dad called over his shoulder at her. Georgia wanted to follow them. She wanted to make sure that Eric would be okay and that Owen, despite his meddling, wouldn't be prosecuted, and that her dad wouldn't get punished again because of her. But she could tell from his tone that she'd disobeyed him one too many times that day, and she knew that the last thing that would help his career would be her walking into the police station and getting involved. So she sat on the curb and waited, kicking at the pebbles by her feet with the tip of her sneaker. The blisters on her toes barely hurt anymore from her hike with Jake that seemed a lifetime away. When her dad finally returned, Georgia jumped up from the curb. "Is he okay? Is he going to be okay?" Officer Lennox didn't answer. Georgia's dad walked over to her, took her in his arms without saying a single word, pulled her close to him, and hugged her like she was the one going to prison. Georgia let him hold her, hugging him back like she had as a little girl, loving how safe she felt in his big arms, how, if she closed her eyes, she could almost forget the terrible day she'd had. "You're not mad?" she asked into his shirt, not looking up in case he was. "We'll talk about a lot of things later. Now, I'm just glad you're okay." "Eric?" "He'll be fine. We all know what Tom was like. It won't be hard to plead self-defense, and Eric's young. Even if they try him as an adult, the worst he'll get is negligent homicide. I think the judge will go easy on him." Georgia hoped it was true, and that her dad wasn't sugarcoating it for her sake. "Owen?" "That's trickier." Her dad paused, like he was thinking. "Hopefully he didn't intentionally lie, though he clearly wasn't telling the truth. I'm sure he'll have charges. Maybe he can cut a deal." "He was just trying to protect Eric." Georgia wouldn't be able to stand it if Jake and Lisa's dad went to jail for trying to help his friend's kid. Georgia's dad put his hand on her head and stroked her hair, like he had when she was young. "You can't protect people from the law without consequences. But it will get worked out a different day. They're both being released on bail, waiting for the hearing." "Can I tell you something?" She didn't wait for his answer. It was a stupid question, since she already knew that her telling him things was what he'd wanted most, second only to her not knowing them in the first place. "Eric asked me not to tell, but I don't want to keep secrets from you and Mom anymore. I never wanted to. I just didn't know how to tell you. But I don't know what else to do." "You can tell me anything. We'll work it out together, whatever it is." Georgia took a deep breath. She hadn't specifically promised Eric she wouldn't tell, but she knew he'd wanted her to. So saying the words to Officer Lennox felt like a betrayal, even as he played the role of her dad instead of a policeman. Eric and Owen weren't the only ones up there this morning. The guys from Pineville Nursery were too, but they're not going to tell you because they threatened their families. Georgia's dad stayed quiet for a long while, then asked, "Do you think they had anything to do with Tom's death?" Georgia pulled back. For half a moment, she was stunned that her dad was asking her opinion. When she recovered, she pushed past her pride and gratitude and considered the question carefully, letting go of her dad so she could pace and think. Could Eric have been lying in the car just now? No. There was one thing that made her sure. Owen. He'd been lying, or at least withholding, to protect Eric, but he wouldn't have done the same for the guys in Pineville. If they had killed Tom, he would have let them take the fall. No, Georgia said, sure, with everything she'd learned that day, that it had, in fact, been Eric that had landed the fatal blow. Because of that, I think we should let Eric and Owen keep their secret. Georgia remembered Eric's face in the car when she'd mentioned Pineville, and Jake's warning not to go there. There's something off about them. If Owen and Eric think it's too dangerous to bring them into it, I believe them. I think you're right, her dad said, scratching his chin. Since Eric was the one who accidentally pushed Tom over that log, and Owen was the one to help him cover it up, even though the boys at Pineville Nursery were there, they weren't involved in Tom's death, and from the sounds of things, bringing them into this would just put Rose, Ryder, and the whole Owens family in danger. There's no choice, really. They weren't a part of the crime anyway. Georgia was relieved and sick all at the same time. She, her dad, Jake, Owen, and Eric all knew something not right was happening at Pineville Nursery, and that on some level, they'd been involved in Tom's death. But there was nothing they could pin on them, so they were all going to pretend like they weren't there. But even in all that turmoil, telling her dad the truth, the whole truth again, felt so good. Even though everything else was still a mess, she and her dad were at least on the same page again, and that made everything feel a lot less scary. If the guys at Pineville are so desperate to stay away from the police, why did they call them on me? I wasn't even really trespassing. You were in the office when he stole that contract, right? Yeah, Georgia answered tentatively, testing their new truce. He probably guessed what you were doing there and wanted to discredit you in case you tried to testify against him. If he's already called the cops on you, you have a motive for revenge, and that makes you less believable. Oh, Georgia rubbed her tired eyes with the balls of her hands. When had everything gotten so complicated? I'm sorry, and I'm sorry I got you kicked off the case. She looked up into his big blue eyes. He put his hands on her shoulders, holding her at arm's length and looking into her eyes that mirrored his. Is that what you think happened? I know it is. I heard you and Mom through the kitchen vents. He pulled her back in for another hug, tighter. Honey, I don't know what you think you heard, but the chief and I decided together that I should be off the case. Picking you up from Pineville Nursery today was the scariest moment of my life. I don't ever want anything like that to happen again. So I took myself off the case to give us all a little distance. You know about Pineville? They've been on our radar for a long time. Lots of shady deals and rumored criminal activity. Nothing we can pin on them, yet. So it wasn't my fault you're off the case? I wouldn't say that, her dad laughed. The chief was pretty eager to agree with me. With how messy everything was getting, he didn't want to risk a mistrial, but you don't need to worry about that now. Let's get you home. He ruffled her hair and opened the passenger door. Can we stop by Jake's on the way? Her dad hesitated, then shook his head. I've already had to pick you up 3 times as a police officer today. Let's not make it a 4th. What? Her dad must be confused. I'm not trying to start anything. I just want to make sure Jake's okay, she said. Let's give them some space, Bug. We've all had a long day, and Owen will be getting home soon. Just let them have a night. Just the four of them. As they drove past Jake's house, Georgia tried to get a glimpse of someone through the bright windows. She wasn't worried about Lisa. Her best friend had been fine when her dad had gotten arrested. Why wouldn't she be fine now that he was on his way home? But with the day Georgia and Jake had had, and everything Eric had said, you can talk to him later. Her dad kept driving. As much as Georgia wanted to argue, he was probably right. Jake didn't need his awkward summer date showing up. He needed time with his dad. She leaned back in her seat, rolling down the window and closing her eyes, letting the cool evening air caress her face and the hum of the engine in her dad's tuneless humming lull her to sleep. Death at Dogwood Lake, Chapter 13. The next day, after begging for like an hour, Georgia finally convinced her parents to let her check on Jake, but only if Sienna drove her. They wouldn't be letting her go anywhere alone anytime soon. Sienna, despite being the one that had given her the car keys the night before, and being the one in the family who often disregarded the rules, breaking curfew and having mediocre grades at best, was suddenly considered the more responsible of the Lennox girls. Georgia took a deep breath as they parked in the Meadows driveway. "Good luck," Sienna said, patting Georgia's shoulder like she was going to take an AP test or quit a job. "I'm just here to say hi. It'll be fine," Georgia said with a confidence she didn't feel. Dread had been brewing in her empty stomach since last night. It had been too weird the way her dad hadn't let her stop at the Meadows and making a joke about having the cops called for her again. It was almost as if he knew something she didn't, like he knew they wouldn't want her there. She'd been too physically tired and emotionally fried to register until she'd been laying in bed, unable to sleep. But it was too absurd to even consider. As involved as she'd been, none of this was her fault. Georgia forced her feet to the front door, slowly dragging herself there. This is what she had wanted, and now she was here. She made herself raise her hand and ring their doorbell. Laura opened it and frowned. "Lisa's not home," she said, already closing the door. "Oh, I'm here to see Jake," Georgia said, putting her hand out. It wouldn't have stopped the door, but it was enough to make Jake's mom hesitate. "He can't see anybody now," she said, her eyebrows knitting together. She whispered what sounded like a curse word in Japanese and shut the door. Georgia stood, stunned, pulling her hand back. Only yesterday, Jake's mom had picked her up from the mountain, welcomed her inside, made pancakes for her, and celebrated her birthday like she was one of her own children, which after 10 years of being her daughter's best friend, she kind of was. But the woman who had just opened and closed the door on her had been more like a stranger. Georgia didn't know how long she stood there, like she was waiting for Jake's mom to reopen the door and tell her it had all been a mistake, or a prank, something they could laugh about. The door didn't open. Eventually, Georgia convinced her feet to take her back to the car where Sienna was applying mascara to her lashes. "No luck?" Sienna asked, with more sympathy than Georgia would have expected, but less surprise, like she'd known Jake's mom wouldn't let her in. Thinking about it now, maybe she had. Maybe they all had. Her dad must have known last night they didn't want to see her. And that's why her parents had finally let her go, so she'd stop begging them and see for herself it wasn't them she needed to convince. Sienna started the car, but before she could put it in reverse, a girl in an oversized t-shirt with long dark hair ran around the side of the house to the driveway. Lisa. Georgia rolled down her window. Lisa reached in and wrapped Georgia in a big hug. Don't worry about Mama. She'll be fine. She's just mad about the fight, you know. Lisa pinched Georgia's cheek like she was a baby, and Lisa was the doting aunt. You're so cute, but maybe don't come back for a while. Let Laura cool off. Lisa smiled as big as the sun and ran off, waving behind her like they'd just had a completely normal conversation. The fight? Georgia asked Sienna, like she might have a clue. The car was colder than it had been before Lisa's warmth and happiness, and Georgia was more confused than ever. Was Jake's mom somehow blaming her for this? Did she think it was her fault her husband had been arrested, or was now being prosecuted for obstruction of justice, or withholding information, or whatever it was they might charge him for? It's not like Georgia had expected a celebration, but it was because of her that Owen wasn't in jail right this moment. I don't get it, Georgia said. I just don't get it. Okay, I'm not authorized to tell you this, so you have to promise not to let the parents know. They think you're too delicate right now. I think they need to give you more credit. Georgia hesitated to agree. She'd had enough of keeping secrets from her parents for a lifetime, but she also wanted to know what Sienna knew. Luckily, Sienna didn't wait for commitment. It's like Lisa said. Sienna reversed out of the driveway and pulled onto the main road. They blame you for the fight. Jake and his dad have been fighting for a long time, way before I had anything to do with it. No, stupid, not that fight. The one with Eric last night. If you hadn't told Jake about the hat, about Eric, he wouldn't have gone over there and punched him, and Rose wouldn't be pressing charges. What? Yeah, apparently she saw the whole thing out the window and called the cops. Since Dad showed up, they convinced her that they didn't need to bring Jake in, but she still wants him punished. Georgia put her head in her hands. Every time she tried to fix something, she seemed to only make it worse. She had to find a way to talk to Jake, but that probably wasn't going to happen today. Over the next 2 months, between Georgia's grounding, Jake not answering his phone, and Laura blaming her for Jake's criminal charges, Georgia didn't so much as get a glimpse of him until Eric's hearing. Jake and Georgia were called as witnesses, and, in the end, Eric was convicted of negligent homicide, with a sentence reduced to community service if he agreed to cooperate with the authorities. After the hearing, Georgia convinced her parents to wait downstairs in the main lobby while she waited in the hallway for Jake. Lisa had given her a wink as she walked out, which Georgia was pretty sure meant she would try to get her a few moments alone with Jake. Just as Georgia was about to give up and join her parents, the Meadows family walked out of the double doors of the courtroom. Laura immediately froze, put her arms around her children, and tried to steer them away. Owen stopped her and came over to Georgia with open arms, a peace offering. Georgia stepped into his embrace, and he awkwardly patted her on the back. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for finding the truth. I was trying to help Eric, but I see that if I had gone to jail, it would have hurt more people than I could have helped. And Eric, he's going to be okay. This community will make sure of that." Georgia nodded as they stepped away, unsure what to say. As Owen walked back to his family, Lisa pushed Jake forward a step and put her arm through her mom's. "Come on, Mama, they can't get into trouble here." Owen helped shepherd Laura away, leaving Jake and Georgia in the wood-paneled hallway, looking at each other with everything to say and no words. I'm sorry, they said at the same time. "No, I'm sorry," Jake said again. "The fight wasn't your fault. Mom shouldn't be blaming you for it. I was dumb, and your dad's been helping convince Rose to drop the charges. Now that Eric's hearing is over, now that they've gone so easy on him, I think there's a chance." "That's good," Georgia said, unsure of what to do with her hands, wishing she had pockets to put them in. She clasped and unclasped her fist, trying not to shift her weight from foot to foot. "So you're okay?" "I'm okay," he said. "I'm guessing your dad wasn't actually cheating on your mom." "No, it was all about selling the nursery, like you guessed." "And the money?" "Tom was stealing money." Jake shrugged like none of it mattered anymore. "And are you okay?" He looked at her with those deep brown eyes from under his dark lashes, and for just a second, it almost felt like she was back in his truck, on their way to her first date. "Yeah," Georgia said. "My parents won't let me get my license until I'm about 20 now, and I think my dating life is shot for good, but other than that, yeah, everything's fine." Instantly, Georgia regretted her joke about her dating life. But some things, like her making a fool of herself in front of Jake, never changed. She let her embarrassment go, and that yummy, fluttery feeling she always got when Jake was close and giving her his full attention. She let that go, too. It had been 2 months since her birthday, and not only had Jake not answered her calls, he also hadn't reached out to her in any way. And though she wasn't the one being prosecuted, she'd had enough to deal with. Not that she was about to bring up the nightmares and her new obsession with cold cases and true crime podcasts. She wouldn't admit that since they'd found Tom in the lake, most nights she snuck into Sienna's room because she couldn't sleep alone. Or that even though Tom hadn't technically been murdered, that was all she could think about now. With the blowback from Laura Meadows, Georgia hadn't just lost her crush. She'd also lost her best friend and part of her identity. Before that day, the biggest thing she'd had to worry about was passing her driving test. Now, she couldn't go into her basement alone. Lisa had snuck over when she could, but the friendship between the Meadows family and the Lennox family was quite clearly never going to be the same again. "Well, I guess we shouldn't keep our parents waiting," Georgia said, fully expecting Laura to come around the corner at any moment and drag Jake away. "Wait," Jake said, reaching out for Georgia's hand as she turned to go, like he had on her birthday, when he'd carefully helped her over the tree roots and rocks on their way to that field of wildflowers he'd been so excited to show her, and the picnic breakfast he'd planned just for them. Georgia looked up, waiting for what he was going to say next, wondering if he was remembering the same things. "Mom says we're moving," he whispered, looking down at her, searching her face. Georgia swallowed. her eyes not wanting to leave his. She'd heard the rumors, but she hadn't wanted to believe them. Goodbye, Peach. Jake closed his eyes and leaned down, his lips softly brushing hers and lingering like he didn't want to leave. And if they stayed here, his goodbye wouldn't be true. A pleasant tingle shivered through Georgia. She reached up on her tiptoes, wrapped her arms around Jake's neck, and pulled him closer, pressing her lips harder against his, her goodbye unspoken because she didn't want it to be over too. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a mystery-loving friend or consider leaving a review on your favorite podcast player. Most of all, thank you so much for being here today. I loved it, and I'm already excited for next week.